Hongumaheji Diyet Yalu, everybody. Welcome. And my name is Avery Wyatt. I'm your main host for this evening, and welcome to another episode of Annie. We're glad to have you back here with us. For this week's episode, we really wanted to highlight a two-spirit or indigenous or LGBTQ plus indigenous person because we feel it's really important for our youth to hear these perspectives. And I know growing up, I know I wasn't really exposed to any LGBT or two spirit people. And so I think it's really important for our youth, especially our rural youth, to hear these experiences from these people. And so, yeah, that's why we're having this show tonight. And we really encourage you to share it, tune in. And this is going to be on our YouTube page forever. So if you happen to miss it or you have to leave for some reason, just don't worry. You can still check it out on our YouTube page and come back and yeah, please share it with any youth that you know, especially Native youth, just so they're able to be exposed to these experiences that we're going to show tonight. But before we get into our discussion, I would like to introduce my co-host for tonight, Jarrett. So, Jarrett, take it away.
Wahe, Pini Time, Nina Havan, Nanisahit, Zainatja, Nahasihana, Ani Nin. Hello, everyone. My name is Jarrett Work. I am super excited to be joining Avery again on this program. And as Avery said, we have a really good discussion coming forward. And I think it's really important that we continue to have these conversations with our Two-Spirit and LGBTQ relatives outside of Pride Month. So I'm really excited that we're able to have this conversation with Souksavanh. And yeah, I'm really excited to move forward with this.
Awesome. Thanks, Jarrett. And thanks for coming back again. I know this is our second show together, so I'm excited to see what we can do. And so now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests for this evening. Their name is Souksavanh Keovorabouth. So Souksavanh, take it away too.
Hello everyone. Yat a sha'e Souksavanh Keovorabouth yinishia. Kia ani nishle nuts oze bashichin. Ashiheta nuts oze dashanella. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I am super excited to have this conversation, and I'm glad that we're able to have a discussion like this. So thank you again, Avery and Jarrett, for the invitation today, for being here. A little bit about me. I do identify as Two-Spirit or Nadle, which is the Diné term, the Navajo term. I also identify as urban. I also identify as Diné. I'm an enrolled member of the Diné Nation, and also second generation Laotian. So my father actually came to America from Laos during the Vietnam War. So I like to let folks know that I have a lineage of survivors of the Vietnam War. I have a lineage of survivors from relocation. I have survivors in my family and my lineage of the Indian placement program. So there's a lot to digest there within itself. So I'm excited to see where this conversation goes. But currently I am going to be a third year. Actually, I guess I am a third year now. Ph.D. student in Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Oregon State University. And I'm super excited to be here, as I mentioned. And just to let folks know, I'm also just got word that I was accepted into a coup d'etat program, which is kind of like a dual joint program with a university in Australia, Macquarie University, where I will be studying in hopefully next year, if everything clears up. We know the pandemic is still going on, so I might be there next year studying Indigenous studies, and when I get back, I'll get 2 PhDs, so that's super exciting. But thank you so much for allowing me to be here, and I'm excited to answer some of these questions and be in community with everyone.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we're glad to have you here, and congratulations on going. You're going to be making a huge leap to Australia. And I know that's hard for us Native people. It's hard for us to just kind of leave our lands in a way. So going all the way to Australia is a huge accomplishment. So I just want to congratulate you first for that. And yeah, we'll just sort of hop into our discussion. And as I don't think I said this at first, but we're really trying to get this for the youth to be able to learn from your experiences. So first off, I just want you to describe your journey from high school to college. So how was it in high school, and then how did you get into colleges to where you are now?
Yeah, for me, I graduated in 2013, which is a while back. So I hope my story resonates and still is relatable to folks in the room. I know that Avery and Jared and I were kind of joking about that. Like, it's not too long ago. So we're hoping that it's still relatable. Essentially, so I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, which is where I'm currently at right now. Due to the pandemic, I moved back home, which is really awesome to be back with family. Um, and so I went to school in Phoenix as well. I went to Desert Ridge High School in Mesa. And at that time, I was involved in a lot of stuff. Like, I think for me, as like a queer Indigenous person who wasn't out at the time, I wasn't out in high school. And so I felt like my identities, I had to overcompensate in some way. So I took AP classes and I did student council, or I tried to do cross country. LOL, I said tried to do cross country. But I think like me doing all of that was to like kind of prove that, one, queer people can do all of that and more, and two, like trying to compensate. I wasn't sure about my identities at the time, and as like a queer Indigenous person, multiracial Indigenous person, right, you often get told like you're not enough, or you're not Indigenous because you're not 100% Native, right? And so we get into this really deep discussion where I was like, I did all of this to make up for the fact that this is what was said about me, to prove to people like I can do more, right? And so my journey was a lot of that. And then I knew for sure I wanted to continue on with my education. And something that I was involved in was, like, as I mentioned, AP classes, but also like a lot of science classes. And I was like, thought I was good at it. And so a lot of people were like, you should do medicine or you should do a science, right? And we get told to, like, because you're good at something, you should do it. But was I enjoying it? And I had to really reflect on that for myself. Like, medicine isn't what I want to do, because I have and this isn't a bash or anything. I have relatives who are nurses, who are in medicine, that I didn't feel like, one, it was a pathway that they wanted me to do, not what I wanted to do. And so I had to really reflect on, like, is medicine right for me, right? And or do I think I could do it? And also all these other things. But eventually I came to the conclusion that I was not going to continue on with science or STEM, and I actually went into urban planning, which is something that I'm super passionate about now. So that was a transition that I did into, like, from hard science to kind of like social science, but also pretty scientific as well, about looking at the way cities are structured, because I was born and raised in Phoenix. And I am also originally from the Navajo Nation, as I mentioned, but I identify as urban because I think there's this dichotomy between, like, you are either Native or not based on your geographic location, without understanding the harsh history that Indigenous people have gone through, right? And so I'm continuing this work to allow urban Native folks, multiracial, multi-ethnic Indigenous folks, queer Indigenous folks, to know that, like, right, our identities are valid within these spaces. And so I know that was a long answer, but that kind of was like my journey throughout, like, understanding myself in high school a little bit, and then going into college, and like what really mattered to me. And I know that I feel like I have grown so much being in that experience, and I think that I could get that anywhere else, right? But I think that it really shaped my view and how I begin to understand what we define as a complex identity, which I don't think is as complex as we make it to be, right? And there are systems in place that do that.
Yeah, that's really really interesting how how we as people, you know, really use like our identities to really like move forward with what we want to do. And I know me personally, like my identity, I connect with you the same way. Like my parents, they wanted me to go into science and stuff, and it really wasn't for me. And I gave it a shot, and I just didn't like it. I'm definitely more of an artistic person, and I think you have a really unique experience coming from a multiracial background. So maybe for our listeners, can you really talk to us how like your identities as an Indigenous Two-Spirit person, also multiracial, like how your cultures intersect with you and the work that you do?
Yeah, for me, it has been really interesting navigating a lot of spaces, right? Because I read as like Indigenous in some spaces, but also in like Indigenous spaces, I don't read as that. Some people just assume that I am full Asian, and I like to identify as Asian, right? But I think there have been moments and times where my identities, like I have been reflecting in the ways that like, what does it mean to be Indigenous in this place in Phoenix in the US, while also having an identity that is second generation to the US, right? Because it is really interesting, and I have to consider a lot of things. Like I have to think about one, how the Vietnam War, for example, has impacted my life, right? Or immigration has impacted my life, because like, right, if my father wasn't able to come to the US, like what does that mean? You know, like, and so I try to like advocate for all of these different pieces of my identity. And I don't like to think about it as like, oh, I'm only 50% Laotian, or I am 50% Diné, right? I feel as though, and I was actually on a panel the other day, and I shared this story about my great grandma who was very traditional, and she knew that I like struggled with my Indigenous identity, my Diné identity as like a person. Like what does it mean, and how do I navigate it in a lot of ways? And so she said something really special that stuck with me, was like, although you're not like 100% Navajo, which is how we begin to understand blood quantum, but she said, you are Diné, right? And that was very powerful, because it made me feel like I have a community, I have an identity, and I can be Diné and Asian, or Diné and Laotian, right? Diné and Nadle, or queer, right? Because I think we have built in the US a very singular way of understanding identity, when, right, that's not how we identified as Indigenous people, where we have very diverse, and that's what's awesome about being Indigenous, is that we have always been diverse. We have always been multi-ethnic. We have always been queer, right? And so how do I, as like a scholar activist, and I really emphasize the activist part, because I'm in this space in academia for the reason of like my family, my community, my identities, because we're not represented in these spaces. So I like to bring my whole self, right? I have to bring in Diné spaces, Indigenous spaces, that I am Asian, and I can't separate that. I can't separate that from myself, because I'm already in existence, right? And so we have to envision Indigenous futures as multiracial, as multi-ethnic, as queer, because we have queer folks, right? And so, and of course, we can add so much more to that list that allows us to be diverse and accepting, and I think that's where like magic happens, is when we can envision our futures in that way, instead of cis, instead of hetero, instead of like right, in those heteronormative ways, we can look outside of that and envision a future. And so I like to just bring my whole self and in the ways that like I have been limited. And so I try to use that to my advantage of like, I am all of these and I have to write about all of these, and all of these actually impact me in very similar ways. And I take it serious, and I like to advocate for other people who don't know how to navigate that space, because we have been taught that we can only choose one when that's not the truth.
Yeah, that's really true. I think I personally seen, I mean, I myself am just a Native person, so I can't speak too much on that, but I know a ton of people, including like my partner and others, who do often find themselves conflicted with choosing which identity to become. But I mean, you just said it. You don't have to choose either or. Like, you are you, and you are that person. And as we talk more about what it means to be like a two-spirit or LGBT person, and also June for Pride Month, as a two-spirit person, what does Pride Month mean to you? And I know Jarrett said it well at the beginning, because we tend to only have these conversations during Pride Month, and then after that, it's like, okay, wait till next June. And it's the same with like Indigenous Peoples Month. It's only during that month. And so, what does Pride mean to you?
Yeah. So I'll kind of answer it in like in the way that in a way that's like, right, we do only celebrate Pride in June, or like marketed Pride in June. And so I think like as a two-spirit, not like queer person, I try to live it and experience it. Well, I will always experience, but like bring it into my work and my family and the spaces that I occupy, not only in June, right, but always advocating and talking about these topics within different spaces, and something I've always will continue to do. I think for like Pride specifically, in a lot of ways, it has been whitewashed. I will say that it has been whitewashed in a lot of ways of we, and I think has been progress, of course, but we have seen a lot of folks who get highlighted who are particularly only experiencing the white experience, the white gay experience. And so I never felt like I resonated or connected, or people being able to, I think, right, we're going into a time now where like it is being addressed, right? It is being addressed in the ways that like Pride has been whitewashed. And so I think that the continuation and erasure of Indigenous people has been intertwined with that. And so we don't really hear about like two-spirit or two-spiritness or queer Indigenous folks within Pride. And oftentimes we hear about like, right, the ways, and I want to acknowledge and recognize too that like Pride wouldn't have been Pride without Black and brown trans women and queer folks, right? Because we just wouldn't have had Pride. And I think that like Indigenous people are also in that conversation. But something about the US, and I feel like we all can kind of attest to this, is like Indigenous people will always be, and that's a product of colonization, will always be erased from these conversations in a lot of ways. And so to erase Indigenous people from Pride, or two-spirit from Pride, or how we begin to understand two-spirit, and for folks, I feel like I kind of just dived in on two-spiritness. For folks in the room, I forgot to just like define it. Two-spirit is like, so we have queer, which is like the umbrella term for what we now know as LGBTQ. So it represents a diverse array of gender, sex, and sexuality, which we can begin to understand that are socially constructed. And so two-spirit recognizes that we have this term queer as well, but queer is a colonial a colonial marking of diverse gender, sex, and sexuality. So Two-Spirit actually just recognizes that we've always had it. It's always been in what we now know as the United States, and will always be in the Americas. And it recognizes that there have always been diverse gender, sex, and sexuality before queer, before LGBTQ, before settler contact in the United States or Canada or any settler colonial state. And so I wanted to define that first. So, sorry, y'all. I just kind of get heated into the moment and jump in and dive in. And think everyone knows, and it's okay that you don't. And so, right. So I think that erasure of Indigenous people is consistent within Pride and other months, or in the United States within history, intentionally, because I think, right, there's ways to envision Indigenous futures when there is that present, right? And I think that is a colonial tool to like stop us from dreaming, envisioning, imagining a future where like we have a very diverse, like Indigenous future. And so for me, Pride is I'm on the fence, right? But also happy about it because we're at a time, as I mentioned, where we're able to like bring Two-Spirit to the forefront and acknowledge that like we have always been here. Their Indigenous communities are queer in a lot of ways. And I don't mean like everyone is queer. I mean that when I use queer in terms of placing it on Indigenous communities, I mean that we've always had diverse communities, diverse identities of gender, sex, and sexuality from the very beginning, right? So that's kind of long answer, but kind of what Pride means to me, and hopefully getting into the ways that we're allowed to process Pride outside of Pride Month too, right? Continue this conversation always, because it's important. We don't only exist in this month, we exist all the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I agree. The erasure of Indigenous people is very, it's there, and that's like a lot of the work that I do is rewriting the narrative and really putting Indigenous voices in the forefront and really just centering our stories as a journalist and as a photographer. So moving into our next question, you kind of talked about it a little bit before about some of the challenges that you faced while you were in school. Did some of those challenges follow you into when you went to college? And can you tell us a little bit like how you overcame those challenges?
Yeah, so I think a really big challenge for me is bringing, I think, right, I'm at a stage in this program allows me to challenge myself in the ways I'm thinking, and at the same time produce what we know as like written knowledge or articles or journals, right? I think that has been a really big challenge because I have submitted pieces that have been very queer, very Indigenous, and I think that those pieces have been really, really handled in a very inappropriate way. And what I mean by that is like I have had folks who reviewers, and I will say it and I'll name it, reviewers who have literally made comments on some of my pieces on like, well, where's the citation on this? Or is this valid information about like Indigenous knowledge? And or why or how would this look different if it was in a Western approach? And it's like, well, that's not my targeted audience, right? That's not what I'm trying to do with my work. And a lot of times it is discouraging, right? It's hard because you're trying to write for your community, for your people, for your family, and then you get a review pack that's like this doesn't make sense, or like this isn't good information, or even being denied because I think intentionally or not, I think there are systems in place that literally do not like the advancement of indigenous knowledge. And I will also name especially queer indigenous knowledge. So I want to just mention that, like, right, I applied for a Fulbright scholarship. I didn't get it. I got to semifinalists, which is pretty cool. But also, like, I think something that I reflected on was like, I don't think they were ready for me looking at urban planning as a settler colonial tool that has done racial, gendered, and sexual violence, right? And I think as a queer indigenous scholar now, I have learned to know where my work is valued and where I can put it. And that has been a really big challenge, because I'm like, this is important work, and like, it's discouraging when you don't get a scholarship, when you don't get the reviews that you want to get, right? Because sometimes I don't think people are ready. And I think that we just have to be ready, because these are important experiences, important information, important knowledge, right? And I think like overcoming that, just like finding other indigenous people like us in this space, or my cohort or family. I even will like vent out to family about like my frustrations about like academia, and like it is tough, right? It is hard trying to always getting denied, or people not understanding Two-Spirit, or people not understanding queer indigeneity. And so I think, right, just finding those people in my niche has been very helpful. And also having good advisors and mentors. I actually have a very awesome supervisor advisor who I know that she's my an editor of a journal I submitted to, and the reviews were that's the reviews I was talking about. And she validated my work, and she was like, I don't know what they were talking about. Like, I don't think they were indigenous, and like they didn't know what you were talking about, but I do, and this is important work. And so having people in these spaces is validating, and I feel like I want to continue on that piece. At first, when I saw the reviews, I was like, I just want to just drop this and not pick it up again. But having mentors like that, or even relatives, right, to read your pieces, to validate it, is also heartwarming as well.
Yeah, it's important to have that validation, especially in higher education, because that's one thing I know youth, we don't really talk about it enough, but the higher education system is colonial, and we have to insert ourselves in these spaces that sometimes weren't meant for us. And even in high school, the high school you're in now, if you're a youth out there, sometimes those spaces aren't meant for you. So it's always good to have that mentor or somebody else to talk to give you validation, because your experiences are valid. And like someone said in the comments too, the citation is your life experience. So yeah, you shouldn't have to want to like design your work for like non-native people. So, and that brings us to our next question too. So it is, what unique perspectives are specific to only Native or Two-Spirit LGBT students? So something that you think that only, or something that you think is unique to only those students or yourself.
Yeah, I think, and this was a topic I've been really reflecting on as well. I think a unique perspective experience. One, I want to like note that especially for the high school students, or even the youth and who are watching this, that like, one, your identity is valid, and two, like, you know yourself more than someone else. And if you don't, or are navigating or like confused, you have people, resources like us to talk to who are open to help you process your identity, these complex structures that have been imposed onto us. But I think something that I've encountered, and I was reflecting on this actually yesterday with some good friends of mine, is that I think the erasure of queerness and two-spirit in Native communities and Indigenous communities, which is a tactic and a way of erasing our experiences in a lot of ways. And what I mean by that, and I'll give an example. So, for example, we have the Diné Marriage Act on the Navajo Nation of 2005, which doesn't recognize same-sex marriage. And I'm not advocating for like, oh, we need same-sex marriage, but I think that imposes a certain idea and a certain ideology within our nation that allows homophobia, transphobia to continue, right? And so we have stories, we have, and I'll use an example specifically for Diné, and I encourage folks in this space, in this room, to ask about two-spiritness within your own community as well. But we have like Nadle, as I mentioned before, kind of loosely translates to two-spirit. Nadle is the Diné term, Navajo term for two-spirit. And right, like I think those stories show and set up how our structures are as a community. The roles and responsibilities, the livelihood, the presence of queer two-spirit folks in Indigenous communities, right? And to have something like this act, the Diné Marriage Act, just erases the fact that we've always had two-spirit folks within our community or queer folks within our community. And so I think that is a very unique perspective, because I think we get fed from Western media that like Indigenous people are straight. We get fed that Indigenous people are stoic, that like men are, there's a binary one, and then two, that like we have to be stoic all the time, when these are just made up things that Western culture has imposed onto us. And so I'm at a point now where like, this is a conversation that I was having with these close friends, where, right, the livelihoods that we have now have been like a product of colonization. And so like me living in Phoenix, for example, is a product of relocation or a product of the Indian placement program, not directly, but the ways that Indigenous people have been treated during those times. You know, we all have been impacted by boarding school in some ways, right? Which erased a lot of our history. And so I was like challenging some of my friends, some of my colleagues, and something I want to continue to write about is like, right, I don't think that questioning elders is undermining elders. I think, right, we have to think about the ways in which we are diverse and ever so diverse, right? And will be continuing to be diverse communities. And so I think asking from curiosity is very important and impactful. And I think this continuation of silencing queer folks, especially queer Indigenous folks, to justify that we've never had queerness is a lie. One, two, I think it's just so unique because we have always been fed these false ideas of indigeneity, whether that, no matter how you identify, right, we have been fed what Indigenous or Native or I'll use the term Indian is supposed to be. And so I think like as queer folks, that really impacts the way that we view ourselves because queerness isn't involved in that. And so, yeah, I think that is a very unique perspective on that queer Indigenous folks, Two-Spirit folks face.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for putting that into perspective. I know Avery and I, when we were putting these questions together, we were really trying to figure out how to word basically what you just said into a question so how you can answer it. And thank you for answering it so perfectly. This kind of goes into our next question about what can our communities and even our colleges, what can they do to best support our Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus relatives? Like what could we be doing to, you know, creating a more inclusive, a more, I don't want to say safe, but like a better environment for our, you know, our relatives?
Yeah, I think one something that I've experienced and I hope to continue to achieve within my activism work is find myself not limited by what our understandings are now, because I think the beautiful part about being Indigenous is that we're always constantly in motion, not physically, and we could be physically too, but I mean, like, right, the way we think is beautiful, and we can always adapt, change, include, accept, right? And I think our ways of limitations can be harmful in a lot of ways, and I could argue an additional product of assimilation or colonization, I'll say. And what I mean is, like, listen to Two-Spirit, LGBTQ, queer folks, and their experience, right? Because it's so unique, whether that is on your traditional homelands or in urban spaces, right? It's important to just listen to folks. And also, I think, right, like, limiting the idea that Two-Spiritness doesn't exist only hinders ourselves, or Two-Spirit is only limited to urban spaces because that is where it was formed in the 90s, is very limiting. And so how do we as like community allow ourselves to think outside to enhance what we now know as Two-Spirit, right? Or what we know as Nadle. I'll use that example again, and adapt it to our communities, because, right, youth listen, youth here's the way that we talk, here's the way that we communicate or talk about a specific group, right? And that's really important. So I think the best way to support is to listen and to not limit your thinking in the ways of what we know now, in the present day. And I think that we can envision, I think, right, envisioning together is really awesome, but also listening to what people envision for themselves and what we envision for our communities, because that will ultimately transform what we understand as Indigenous, or transform our communities, our relationships with each other.
Mm-hmm. And I was thinking too, for youth, I know you stated it perfectly at the beginning, that us here, if you are youth out there, we are resources to come to if you have questions or if you're just seeking out resources. But what are some resources that you know that are most helpful, you think, for Indigenous youth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think some great resources. Depending, so I'm in Phoenix, so I don't. I can only speak for like some resources in Phoenix that are like physical, that you can physically go to. So I know that there are specific centers such as like the Phoenix Indian Center that you could go to, the Native Health, which is another center that you could go to for specific services of HIV testing or STI testing, right? These are additional resources that I think we don't really talk about often within our communities. I think there are great resources on social media, such as the group that we're in now, right? This is a great resource. And then also just like really awesome Two-Spirit work that is being done. The first person that I thought about right now is Ryan Young on Instagram. I don't want to say I'm really big, but I really enjoy Instagram. So please go ahead and like follow me or follow everyone in this space right now, Avery and Jarrett, if you need additional resources. But those are some that I can think of right now. And also some awesome readings, and depending on what we define as resources, I think some readings are really good too, thinking about poetry and scholarly text. And also just like I feel like my response isn't that great about resources, but there are some out there, and I want folks and encourage folks to continue to look on Instagram. If you have Instagram, I know that a lot of people don't have Instagram, but reach out to folks like us to provide some additional resources. Sorry, I came not prepared for this answer for this question.
No, you're good. You did well. And then if anybody has any questions about resources, yeah, like they said, just reach out to us and we'll get you those resources, because I know there's a lot, especially around the state of Nevada and the surrounding area. So just reach out to us.
Yeah, some of the resources that I know off the top of my head specifically for youth that they can look into, like the Center for Native American Youth at the Aspen Institute. I know they partnered with GLAAD last year and really put out this first of its kind report on the impacts that Native LGBTQ and Two-Spirit Native youth face in elementary school and in middle school. So that was a really good report to look up. And then also We Are Native. They have a lot of good resources as well. And yeah, like Souksavanh said, Instagram is really good. That's how I found them. I was like looking through my Instagram page and I was like, who would be good for this conversation? So that's how we came across Souksavanh. So this kind of leads me into our question for you, Souksavanh. What is the best advice that you have for Two-Spirit and LGBTQ plus Native youth?
Yeah, I think for me, I just want to like thank folks in this space, in this room, for listening and being in community with each other on this very important topic. And I think, right, we don't get told enough as Two-Spirit, as LGBTQ folks, that like we belong. And so I want to let you know that you do belong. You are valuable within our communities. You are loved. And I want to extend that invitation that like, right, that in this space, you are seen and recognized by all of us right here. Your identities, as I mentioned before, you know more about yourself than other people do. And so do not subscribe to what other people impose onto you about gender, sex, and sexuality, because right, you'll know, you have the answer yourself. And if you have questions about it, I encourage you to look up more information about Two-Spirit or LGBTQ. If you have the accessibility to ask folks about what it means to be Two-Spirit or LGBTQ, right? And I think for me it was really hard because I think I've always been fed the idea, and this was a literal like mind set that I had when I was younger, in high school actually, was like, right, Native men are stoic. They're meant to be with like a woman, and that's what we've been fed in Western films. And I just want to let you know that like you don't have to subscribe to that, and that like you are valued. And I just want to say that right now because I don't think a lot of people hear that now. And you have, right, and I keep mentioning this because I can't mention it enough, you have people here for you. If you don't have them in your life right now, you have them now, right? You have Avery, Jarrett, and I. So you have us now. And so I just want to, and I know I kind of just threw Avery and Jarrett in there too, but I just wanted to emphasize that because it is important, because sometimes I feel like I have had those experiences where I've navigated by myself, or I didn't know how to understand something about myself, and I felt alone and isolated. But I want you to know that you're not alone, right? You're not.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Souksavanh. I think it's super important that our youth know that, you know, there are people out here that love you, and there are people out here that know how valid you are, and your experiences, your identities, whatever you are, we love you, and you matter. Your life matters. Everything that you
Mm-hmm.
do matters, and it's really important to know that. And don't be afraid to build a family that's outside of your blood family. Like, there are tons of people out there that are more than willing to like put you under their wing and, you know, help you have a better and more fun and just a good life, because I think that's really important for our Two Spirit youth, especially, to know how much that how loved you are and how important
Mm-hmm.
you are.
Yeah, I have to definitely agree with Jarrett and Souksavanh on what they said. And I know you weren't throwing us out there. Like we definitely agree with you that we're really good resources. So don't worry. And yeah, like they said though, just come to us if you have any questions, and just feel free to get in contact with our social media. You can send us a DM, and you can make it anonymous if you like. That's completely fine with us. But just know that we're here for you, and we love you all, and we just want to thank you for um, being so brave and being able to reach out to us. And now we'll move into our question segment for our online questions. And let me check that 1 second. Sorry. Okay, so this one question we have from Gorman is, what types of outreach is being done to those that need more knowledge that you know of? I know this is can be a broad question too, so that you know of.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So this is my aunt. Hi, Auntie. So thank you for this really awesome question. I think, like I kind of was getting to this, and so I'm happy that you asked this, because I think, right, we in some cases have been limited in our knowledge of queerness because of things such as boarding school. And this was a really great example: boarding schools, or allotment. And for folks who don't know about allotment, that kind of happened a little before the boarding school era that divided up land within reservations based on gender, right? So it's constructing gender of what we know now. So identifying masculine presenting people as male, and so giving them a specific lot. And this builds on top of each other. So after that was boarding school, forced folks out of it. And then after that was what? Relocation, which made people live in cities, assimilate to what we now know as cities today. very like they used to call the areas that Native people were in red ghettos, red slums. So that shows the treatment of how we were treated in urban areas. And then we have, like, for example, Indian placement program, which forced Native people into Mormonism, into the LDS Church, and into foster care, which I have lineage that have been impacted by both of these recent ones in many ways. And so I think when we think about queerness, we have to think about, when we say there's no queerness within Native communities, I want us to think and challenge ourselves to, like, at what point was that erased within our histories, right? Because we, as I mentioned, I just created a linear, and I don't believe in this linear construct of time, but a linear way of what has been programmed into Native communities. So we have been impacted through all of that, right? And so I think that the work that I'm hoping to do is allow ourselves to think outside of that. Like, if we are limiting ourselves, what is limiting us? Do we have specific stories within our communities that aren't being told or shared because of one of these policies or programs that have been imposed onto us? Or is that actually how you think that we lived as Indigenous people? And one thing that I was looking at and thinking about was the term Nadle specifically. And I had a conversation with some folks about, like, right, the idea that no one can be Nadle today, which I'm like, is that was kind of talking about this idea. What is there? Why do we limit ourselves into what we understand as queerness, or understand ourselves as, like, two-spirit or Nadle folks? And we're at a time right now as activists, as scholars, as scholar activists, that we can create our future, right? We have the possibility to do that. And that, I kind of mentioned this before, is the beautiful part about indigeneity, about futures, about us thinking about, like, our grandchildren, our great-great-grandchildren, right, in the future. And I think that we have to recognize that we have histories that are traumatic in a lot of ways, histories that have limited us. And I think we're at a point now where we can kind of reflect and sit on it, of, like, processing trauma. And I think I'm just rereading the question. I think I don't have a specific answer onto what types of outreach is being done, but I do have hope that we are able to have conversations with each other, have conversations with elders, have conversations with just the community about two-spiritness and queerness, and that we're able to, like, flourish, right, and thrive as Indigenous folks. And I think that I am in the works right now writing a piece about futurisms, and this is a part of that piece, is that, like, when we envision Indigenous futures, it's going to be beautiful and magic and all this great stuff, right? And that also includes two-spirit. It also includes multiracial. It also includes all these other branches of identity within that. And so I don't have a specific answer, but I do want us to think outside of the limitations that have been put on us through policy and programs that stop us from our possibilities to thrive and to have great magic with each other, great magic within, like, conversations. And I don't mean, like, literal magic, but right, when you experience something beautiful, it feels magical, right? And so I'm hoping that we're able to get to that point with all of us, right?
Hmm. And I think maybe you're struggling to answer the question because I think this is outreach right now. So what we're doing is sort of like to help. So maybe that's why. And so I think it's just
Yeah.
like you said, the discussions like this, what we're talking about is the outreach that we're looking for. So, and then these discussions usually go on to like my, like say my family member or my cousin may see this and this person may see it. And so it's always going to keep getting passed down, kind of like our knowledge always has. So I think just more of
Mhm.
this outreach is important, like Souksavanh said. And then we have
Yeah.
one final question. Oh no, you're good.
Oh yeah. I was just gonna also add. It just came to me. So I don't like to use the term like I want to unlearn this thing because I think that identifies something about like going back when I think, right, we have experiences for specific reasons. And so you learn something for a specific reason. And I think we're at a point of relearning something. And so I think, right, I think for me and I've had encounters with like relatives or family members where like I learned it like this before, and it's like, okay, well, we're always gonna learn, right? We're always gonna grow and envision things, right? And so I think what I'm talking about is that limitation of like, well, I learned it this way, and it's like, well, knowledge and time and stuff isn't fixed to just learn to stay in that same place. We're always constantly growing and experiencing things. And so I hope that folks allow themselves to one challenge that idea of like this fixedness of learning things because we're always going to learn. I'm not an expert. I think I will always be learning, and I think right, all of us will always be learning. We don't have all the answers, but that's also the great thing about envisioning our futures. So I just wanted to add that part.
Hmm. And yeah, on to our last online question. So this one's from Sylvia. So are there any books slash podcasts or resources that she can share with students who may be struggling with their identities?
Yeah. So some podcasts that I've been listening to, I think, are mostly by like drag queens, and so I've been listening to a couple of drag queen podcasts, but I don't think they explore like struggling with identity. I'm trying to think of some other pieces. I have, as you can see, a pretty um, like cluttered collection of books, but I will definitely love to follow up with this person and give them those resources or provide them to Avery and Jarrett of like some things that I've been listening to or readings that have been very significant to me, to kind of pass along or post on their social media, for folks to have access to. And so I can work on that. I don't have like a quick answer to all of these resources because there's a lot of great ones and I don't want to leave any out.
Oh yeah, that's perfect. And I think we all have that same book cluttered shelf in our house. So no worries about that too. But I just want to thank you again for this. This has probably been one of my most favorite discussions that we've had since we've started. So I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing your experiences and knowledge with us. It's been a pleasure. And I'm just extremely thankful that we were able to have you on because I can't think anybody else that would have said what you would have said. So I just want to say thank you first off. And Jarrett, did you have anything to say?
Yeah, just thank you, Souksavanh, and thank you for everybody that tuned in and has listened, and the people that will continue to watch this important discussion. And I think it's really important that, like I said at the beginning, that we continue to have conversations like this outside of Pride Month and continue to have them throughout the rest of the year because we can learn so much. I mean, I learned so much from Souksavanh in just this 60-minute discussion. So yeah, continue to educate yourselves, and let's not try to make Two-Spirit or anything like that be taboo. Let's really just really make it a part of everyday life and really normalize it because it is normal.
And how about you, Souksavanh? Did you have any last words for the audience or us?
Yeah, thank you all so much for allowing me to be in this space and be in community with everyone. I really enjoyed this conversation. And as you know, like, I don't have all the answers, but I think we're always constantly able to kind of process thoughts and ideas. And so thank you for allowing me to do that in this space as well, right? And I just want to also mention that you can, if you need anything, you can reach out to me. I don't know if my contact information is anywhere, but you can, I usually post on Instagram, and my username is actually my name right here. I don't know if you could see my name on the screen right here in this area, but it's Souksavanh.T.Keovorabouth. And you can follow me there. And I also have some links to some great resources on my Instagram as well. And also some of my pieces on there. I try to do something where I allow all of my pieces that I have written to be accessible for folks, because I know that some journals you have to have institutional access to it, which I don't think is right. And so some of them are available there.
I just wanted to say congratulations again. You're going to be a Dr. Souksavanh. So congratulations, and I wish you nothing but the best. And thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, I think I cut off. But yeah, thank you so much, Souksavanh. I know you could probably still listening. But yeah, thank you for coming in tonight. I hope all of our audience enjoyed our discussion tonight. Like I said, this has probably been one of my most favorite discussions that we've had. And tune in and share this video with everybody who think will be interested. Honestly, just share it either way because it's really cool. And thank you. And honestly, have a good weekend. And we'll see everybody in a couple weeks when we come back with more videos and live shows.
Thank you.